Carlos's hands trembled as he set down the lead pipe beside Diego's soccer cleats. The weight of $200,000 in Camorra blood money pressed against his chest like a stone, but something heavier crushed down on him. The sight of Argentina's golden boy, completely defenseless, stretching his hamstrings with the innocent focus of a child. "Carlitos," Diego said without looking up, using the nickname that made Carlos's throat tighten. "You're breathing like you just ran the stadium steps. What's wrong?" The pipe gleamed dully in the lamplight. One swift blow to the ankle. Clean break. Career over. The Neapolitan families would collect their millions in betting profits, and Carlos would disappear into a new life with more money than his father had ever dreamed of earning in the slaughterhouse. Nothing, Diego. Just nervous about tomorrow. Maradona rolled onto his back, those dark eyes studying Carlos with unsettling intensity. At 25, Diego had already survived more betrayals than most men faced in a lifetime. Corrupt officials, greedy agents, teammates who sold stories to the press. But somehow, impossibly, he still trusted people. Still trusted Carlos. "The Germans are scared," Diego said, sitting up and reaching for his water bottle. "You see their training footage? Tight as violin strings. They know what's coming." Carlos's hand drifted toward his jacket. The pipe felt cold as winter steel. "Do they? Sí, hermano. Tomorrow we show the world what Argentina means, what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself." Diego stood, rolling his shoulders. "My ankle's been bothering me today, little stiff. Maybe you could—" The request hung in the air like smoke. Diego was asking him to look at the ankle. The same ankle Carlos had been paid to destroy. Carlos knelt beside the bed, his fingers finding the joint that would carry Diego's magic tomorrow. The skin was warm, unmarked, perfect. In 18 hours, this ankle would dance through the German defense like water through stone, unless Carlos did what the Camorra expected. "Feels fine," Carlos lied, his voice barely audible. "Strong." Diego's hand landed on Carlos's shoulder. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For choosing Argentina over the money." The words hit Carlos like a physical blow. He jerked back, searching Diego's face for signs of knowledge, of accusation, but all he saw was gratitude. "I don't understand." Diego smiled that crooked smile that would soon grace magazine covers worldwide. "You think I don't know? You think I don't know why a special forces operator worth his weight in gold suddenly needs work guarding a football player? You think I don't know about the approach they made?" Carlos's blood turned to ice water. The pipe in his jacket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Diego, the betting syndicates, the families, they've been circling for months, trying to find someone close to me, someone who could influence the outcome." Diego's voice remained steady, almost casual. "They picked the wrong man." The room spun around Carlos. Diego knew. Had always known. "How long?" Carlos whispered. "Since the beginning. Since you took the job." Diego walked to the window, gazing down at the crowds gathering in the street below. "You want to know something funny? They offered my cousin Eduardo $500,000 to put something in my pre-game meal. My equipment manager got approached about tampering with my boots. Even tried to bribe the team doctor to declare me unfit." Carlos felt sick. The web was bigger than he'd imagined. "But you," Diego continued, turning back with those penetrating eyes, "you were different. You could have done it a dozen times by now, in training, in the hotel gym, during transport. But you didn't." "I thought about it," Carlos admitted, the confession tearing out of his chest like a physical wound. "I know. That's what makes you human." Diego sat back down, close enough that Carlos could see the scar above his left eyebrow from a brutal tackle in Naples. "Want to know what makes you a good man? You're here, telling me you thought about it instead of just doing it." Carlos pulled the pipe from his jacket and set it on the floor between them. The metallic clang echoed in the silence. "They'll kill me for this," Carlos said. "No," Diego replied, his voice carrying a certainty that chilled Carlos more than any threat. "They won't, but others might try someday. When the truth wants to come out." "What truth?" Diego leaned forward, those famous eyes holding Carlos's gaze with laser intensity. The crowd noise from the street faded to nothing. the weight of tomorrow's final pressed down on both of them. That's when Diego Maradona said the 5 words that would echo in Carlos Vega's nightmares for the next 37 years. This was always the plan. Tomorrow we dive deeper into the web Diego had been weaving around the Camorra, and discover why Carlos's choice that night was exactly what Maradona had been counting on all along. Make sure you're following for the next chapter, because what Diego reveals about his real game will change everything you think you know about that legendary World Cup final. The words hung in the Mexico City air like poison gas. Carlos felt his world tilt sideways, the hotel room suddenly too small, the walls pressing in with each shallow breath he managed to draw. This was always the plan. What plan? Carlos's voice cracked like a teenager's. The lead pipe lay between them on the carpet, a monument to his failure, or perhaps his salvation. He couldn't tell anymore. Diego stood and walked to his equipment bag, moving with that fluid grace that made defenders weep. When he turned back, he held a small cassette recorder. The sight of it made Carlos's stomach drop into his boots. The plan to catch them all, Diego said, pressing play. Vincenzo Torino's gravelly voice filled the room, speaking in rapid Italian about odds and leverage points and the necessity of permanent solutions to temporary problems. Carlos heard his own name mentioned twice. Then came other voices, Eduardo's nervous tenor, the equipment manager's frightened whispers, even Dr. Ramirez discussing medical fabrications that could sideline Argentina's star. Carlos sank into the room's single chair, his legs suddenly unreliable. How did you... Connections. Friends who understand that some games are bigger than football. Diego clicked off the recorder. You think the Camorra are the only ones who know how to plan ahead? Through the thin walls came the sound of celebration from neighboring rooms. Teammates laughing, music playing, the easy confidence of men who believed tomorrow would bring glory. Carlos envied their ignorance. You used me, he said. I saved you. Diego's voice carried no apology. You think refusing their money would have been enough? You think they would have just said gracias and walked away? Men like Torino don't accept failure, Carlitos. They eliminate it. The nickname felt different now. Less affection, more manipulation. Carlos studied Diego's face in the lamplight, searching for traces of the young man he thought he'd been protecting. What he saw instead was something harder, older, something that understood the mathematics of survival in ways that made Carlos's special forces training seem like children's games. So what happens now? Carlos asked. Diego moved to the window again, his silhouette framed against the glow of Mexico City's sprawling lights. Somewhere out there, in luxury hotels and shadowy meeting rooms, powerful men were counting money they thought they'd already won. Tomorrow would disappoint them spectacularly. Now you disappear, Diego said. New identity, clean papers, enough money to start over somewhere the Camorra's reach doesn't extend. I have people who can arrange these things. And in exchange? You forget this conversation ever happened. You forget about the recorder, about Torino, about all of it. You become Carlos Vega, security consultant from Buenos Aires. You build a quiet life. Maybe find a woman who makes you laugh. Have children who think their father is a simple man who fixes problems for rich people. The specificity of Diego's vision was unsettling, as if he'd already written Carlos's future biography. What about you? Diego smiled, but there was something predatory in it now. I win tomorrow. Argentina wins. And certain families in Naples learn what happens when they mistake a lion for a lamb. Carlos felt the weight of forces beyond his comprehension. Diego wasn't just Argentina's football hero. He was something else entirely, a player in games that stretched far beyond any stadium. The recordings, Carlos said. What will you do with them? Insurance. Evidence. Leverage. Diego shrugged. Depends what our friends try next, but mostly I'll keep them safe, hidden away where curious people can't find them, unless they really need to surface someday. A chill ran down Carlos's spine. The implications stretched forward through time like shadows. Evidence meant exposure. Exposure meant danger. And danger had a way of following men long after they thought they'd escaped it. I should go, Carlos said, standing on unsteady legs. Your new contact will reach you within the week. Don't try to find me after tomorrow, for both our sakes. Live the life I'm giving you, hermano. Be grateful for it. Carlos reached for the pipe, but Diego's hand caught his wrist. Leave it. Reminder of what almost happened, what you chose not to do. At the door, Carlos paused. Diego, tomorrow will be beautiful. Argentina will dance, the world will remember, and you'll be watching from somewhere safe, knowing you helped make it possible. The hallway seemed endless as Carlos walked toward the elevator. Behind him, Diego's door clicked shut with the finality of a coffin lid. The elevator descended through floors of sleeping players and dreaming fans, carrying Carlos down from the heights of history toward a future he couldn't yet imagine. He didn't know that 37 years later, that future would come knocking on his door with surveillance footage and questions that would tear his careful new life apart at the seams. He didn't know about Isabella, about the security firm, about the quiet happiness Diego had promised him. All he knew was that tomorrow, Argentina would win the World Cup. And somehow, that felt like the least important thing in the world. Buenos Aires, 2023. Carlos Vega woke to the sound of rain drumming against his apartment windows. 37 years and a lifetime away from that Mexico City hotel room. The dream always ended the same way, Diego's door closing with that coffin-lid finality, the weight of secrets pressing down like lead blankets. He rolled over, checking the bedside clock, 5:47 a.m. Isabella wouldn't be up for another hour, giving him time to push the ghosts back into their boxes where they belonged. The coffee maker gurgled to life in his small kitchen as Carlos tried to shake off the lingering unease. The dreams had been coming more frequently lately, always triggered by stress, and business had been stressful. 3 new corporate clients, a politician's daughter who needed discreet protection, the usual parade of Buenos Aires wealthy who paid well for peace of mind. At 58, Carlos had built exactly the life Diego had promised him: quiet, profitable, forgettable. His daughter's laughter echoed from the bathroom as she got ready for university. Isabella had inherited her mother's easy joy and her father's stubborn independence. She also worshipped Diego Maradona with the fervor of a true believer, her walls covered with photos of Argentina's eternal hero. The irony never stopped twisting in Carlos's chest. The intercom buzzed at 6:15, jarring him from his morning routine. Carlos frowned. No one visited this early, and certainly not unannounced. The building's security was good enough to keep out casual intruders. Sí, Señor Vega? My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm a journalist with La Nación. I need to speak with you about the 1986 World Cup. The coffee mug slipped from Carlos's fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor. The sound seemed to echo forever in the sudden silence. Through the thin wall, he heard Isabella humming an old tango, oblivious to the earthquake about to tear their world apart. I think you have the wrong person, Carlos managed. I have surveillance footage, Señor Vega, from the Azteca Hotel in Mexico City. June 28, 1986, the night before the final. Carlos's knees buckled. He gripped the intercom panel to keep from falling. Surveillance footage. Diego had promised him the recordings were hidden, safe, buried with the secrets they contained. But surveillance footage, that was something else entirely. Something Diego might not have known about. What do you want? The words came out as a whisper. To talk. 10 minutes, that's all. Carlos looked toward the hallway where Isabella's voice still carried her morning song. His daughter who believed in heroes. His daughter who wore Maradona's number 10 jersey to every Argentina match. His daughter whose world would shatter if she learned what her father had almost done to her idol. Not here, Carlos said. Café Tortoni, 1 hour. I'll be at the corner table. Thank you, Señor Vega. The intercom went silent. Carlos stood in his kitchen surrounded by coffee-stained ceramic fragments, watching his carefully constructed life crack along invisible fault lines. 37 years of peace, ending with a stranger's voice and the promise of footage that shouldn't exist. Papa? What was that noise? Isabella appeared in the doorway, concern creasing her young face. She looked so much like her mother in that moment that Carlos's chest tightened with old grief. Just clumsy this morning, mija. Dropped my cup. She knelt beside him, helping gather the larger pieces. You okay? You look pale. Carlos forced a smile. Fine, just tired. You better hurry or you'll be late for Professor Martinez's lecture. Isabella kissed his cheek and grabbed her backpack, Maradona's face grinning from a dozen different angles on her bedroom wall as she passed. The front door closed with a soft click, leaving Carlos alone with his breaking world. He swept up the remaining ceramic fragments with mechanical precision, each piece a small reminder of how quickly solid things could shatter. Elena Vasquez. The name meant nothing to him, but then again, the most dangerous people often arrived without introduction. In his bedroom closet, hidden behind winter coats that Buenos Aires rarely required, Carlos found the small lockbox he hadn't opened in 15 years. Inside lay documents from another life, passport photos of a younger, harder man, contact numbers for people who specialized in making problems disappear, and a single photograph of Diego Maradona holding the World Cup trophy. The photo was signed for Carlos, who understood the game was bigger than football. Gracias, hermano. D. Carlos stared at Diego's triumphant smile, remembering how that victory had tasted like ashes in his mouth. He'd watched the final from a Buenos Aires bar, surrounded by celebrating strangers, knowing he was already becoming someone else, someone clean, someone safe. Now Elena Vasquez had footage that could destroy that safety forever. As Carlos dressed for what might be his last morning as a free man, one question burned through his mind like acid. Who had been watching that night in Mexico City, and why had they waited 37 years to come forward? The rain kept falling as Carlos stepped onto the Buenos Aires streets, carrying him toward answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. The Café Tortoni felt like a museum that morning, all dark wood and faded photographs of dead tango singers. Carlos arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table near the back exit, old habits from a life he'd tried to forget. The coffee tasted like burnt memories, and his hands wouldn't stop trembling. Elena Vasquez materialized from the crowd at exactly 8 o'clock, moving with the predatory grace of someone accustomed to hunting reluctant prey. Mid-30s, sharp suit, eyes that missed nothing. She carried a leather portfolio that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Señor Vega. She slid into the opposite chair without invitation. "Thank you for coming. Show me," Carlos said. No pleasantries, no small talk, just the naked desperation of a man watching his world collapse in real time. Elena opened the portfolio and withdrew a tablet. The screen flickered to life, revealing grainy black and white footage of a hotel corridor. Carlos recognized it immediately. The Azteca's executive floor, 37 years ago. He watched his younger self walk down that hallway, the pipe hidden in his jacket, purpose written in every line of his body. German intelligence, Elena said quietly. They were monitoring several players, looking for any advantage they could find. This particular camera was positioned to watch Maradona's room. Carlos's younger self knocked on Diego's door and disappeared inside. Elena fast-forwarded through several hours of empty corridor, then stopped as the door opened again. Carlos emerged, but something had changed. His posture was different, defeated. He left the pipe behind. "Interesting," Elena murmured. "A man goes in prepared to commit assault, possibly career-ending injury, and comes out empty-handed. What changed his mind? I don't know what you're talking about." The lie felt clumsy in Carlos's mouth, but he had to try. The Germans kept this footage classified for decades, only surfaced last month through an intelligence leak in Berlin. Elena's fingers danced across the tablet screen. But it's not the only recording from that night. The screen shifted to audio waveforms. Someone had enhanced the original surveillance to capture sound. Elena pressed play, and suddenly Carlos was hearing his own voice from 1986, younger and harder. "They'll kill me for this." Then Diego's reply, "No, they won't. But others might try someday. When the truth wants to come out." Carlos felt the cafe walls closing in around him. Other patrons chatted about football and politics, oblivious to the apocalypse unfolding at the corner table. A waiter refilled his coffee cup with cheerful efficiency. Normal life continuing while Carlos's existence crumbled. "Who else has this?" he whispered. "That's the interesting question." Elena leaned back, studying his face with clinical detachment. "Because someone paid a great deal of money to acquire it from the German source. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for." Carlos's chest tightened. "Who? I was hoping you might tell me. Because whoever it is, they didn't buy this footage to bury it. They bought it to use it, and they hired me to find you first. The realization hit him like ice water. Elena wasn't just a journalist, she was a messenger. Someone else was pulling the strings, someone who wanted Carlos to know he'd been found, someone who enjoyed watching prey squirm before the kill. What do they want? I don't know. They paid my fee and gave me instructions to show you this. Record your reaction and wait for further contact. Elena's expression softened slightly. But Carlos, I can call you Carlos? You need to understand something. Whoever hired me, they're scared of you. Or scared of what you represent. That's impossible. I'm nobody. Nobody who had access to Diego Maradona the night before the World Cup final. Nobody who was trusted enough to be alone with Argentina's most valuable asset. Nobody who walked away from what appears to be a very lucrative arrangement. Elena closed the tablet. In my experience, when powerful people are scared of nobody, it means nobody knows something that could destroy them. Carlos thought about the other voices on Diego's recordings. Corrupt officials, bent players, the vast conspiracy that had tried to fix the 1986 final. Most of those men were dead now, carried off by age or violence or the simple entropy of criminal life. But their secrets lived on, buried in cassette tapes and surveillance footage that kept surfacing like corpses in a lake. I need to make a call, Carlos said, standing abruptly. To whom? Diego's been dead 3 years. Your old contacts from the security services are either retired or in prison. The Camorra families you dealt with have been absorbed or eliminated by newer organizations. Elena's voice remained calm, but her words cut like surgical instruments. You're alone in this, Carlos. Whoever's hunting you has had 37 years to plan. They know exactly where you're vulnerable. Carlos thought of Isabella getting ready for classes, her Maradona posters watching over her morning routine like protective saints, his daughter who believed her father was just another small businessman in a city full of them, his daughter who would learn the truth about heroes and betrayal and the price of keeping secrets. When will they contact you again? Soon. Elena stood as well, tucking the tablet away with practiced efficiency. My advice? Don't run. Don't try to disappear. They've found you once, they'll find you again. And next time, they might not bother with intermediaries. Carlos watched her walk away through the cafe's morning crowd, another predator returning to whatever shadows had spawned her. He sat back down heavily, staring at his coffee cup, as if it might contain answers to questions he was afraid to ask. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. Love you, Papa. See you tonight. The message felt like a goodbye. Carlos sat motionless in the cafe for 20 minutes after Elena disappeared, watching steam rise from his untouched coffee like incense at a funeral. The familiar sounds of Buenos Aires morning, traffic, conversation, the distant tango from a street musician's accordion, felt suddenly alien, as if he were hearing them through bulletproof glass. His phone lay face down on the scarred wooden table, Isabella's message glowing like an accusation beneath the screen. Love you, Papa. The words twisted in his chest. Love built on lies. Love that would curdle into disgust when the truth emerged, as Elena had made clear it inevitably would. Carlos had spent 37 years constructing a life where he could be worthy of his daughter's admiration. Now that construction was collapsing, and he could see the rotten foundation underneath, the night he'd walked into Diego's hotel room carrying violence and walked out carrying secrets that would poison everything they touched. He forced himself to stand, legs unsteady, and walked home through streets that felt like a maze designed to trap him. Every face in the crowd might belong to Elena's mysterious employer. Every car might contain surveillance equipment. Every shadow might hide the next messenger, the next revelation, the next nail in the coffin of Carlos Vega, security consultant and loving father. His apartment building looked different somehow, smaller, more vulnerable. The doorman nodded with familiar courtesy, unaware that the man he'd greeted every morning for 15 years was becoming someone else entirely. In the elevator, Carlos caught his reflection in the polished steel doors. He looked older than his 58 years, worn down by the weight of carrying buried truths. His father's face stared back at him, the same defeated expression he'd worn after Carlos's mother died, as if life had revealed a fundamental cruelty he'd never suspected. The apartment felt contaminated now. Isabella's Maradona shrine in the living room seemed to mock him, The great man's image multiplied across posters, photographs, magazine covers, all of them watching Carlos with Diego's knowing smile, the same smile from that Mexico City hotel room. The smile of a man who understood games within games, who orchestrated events decades in advance. When the truth wants to come out, Diego had said, as if truth were a living thing with its own agenda, patient and implacable, waiting for the right moment to surface and destroy everything Carlos had built on its unmarked grave. His hands shook as he opened his laptop and began researching Elena Vasquez, journalist with La Nación. That much appeared legitimate. Articles on corruption, organized crime, stories that required the kind of sources who demanded anonymity and communicated through intermediaries. The type of reporter who specialized in excavating buried scandals and watching powerful people squirm in the sudden light. But the timeline troubled him. Elena's byline only appeared in the past 18 months, as if she'd materialized from nothing with a fully formed career. Before that, silence. Digital footprints could be manufactured, careers fabricated, entire identities constructed to serve specific purposes. Carlos had seen it done during his military days, when intelligence services needed clean operatives for delicate missions. The deeper possibility terrified him. Elena wasn't just a hired messenger. She was part of something larger, something that had been building toward this moment for years. The German surveillance footage, the careful research into his current life, the theatrical presentation in the cafe, all of it felt orchestrated by someone who understood how to apply psychological pressure with surgical precision. Carlos's phone rang, jarring him from his spiraling thoughts. Unknown number. Sigh. Silence. Then, "You look worried, Carlitos." The nickname froze his blood. Only one person had ever called him that with such intimate familiarity. But Diego Maradona had been dead for 3 years, his heart finally succumbing to decades of abuse and the weight of being Argentina's eternal god. Who is this? Someone who remembers a young soldier who chose loyalty over money. Someone who appreciates what that loyalty cost. The voice was electronically distorted. Neither male nor female, but the cadence felt familiar. Dangerous. Elena showed you the footage. Now we need to talk about what comes next. Carlos's mouth went dry. What do you want? To finish a conversation that began 37 years ago in a Mexico City hotel room. Diego made promises that night, about safety, about new identities, about burying the past so deep it would never surface. But Diego's dead now, and some promises die with the men who make them. The caller paused, and Carlos could hear traffic in the background, the distant sound of boat horns. Whoever this was, they were calling from the Puerto Madero waterfront, less than 20 minutes from his apartment. There's a warehouse at the old grain terminal, Dock 7. Come alone, come unarmed, and come now. Or tomorrow morning, Isabella's university friends will receive very interesting historical documents about her beloved father and Argentina's greatest hero. The line went dead. Carlos stared at the silent phone, watching his reflection fragment across its dark screen. The warehouse district, where Buenos Aires hid its ugliest business, where conversations happened that left no witnesses. He looked one last time at Isabella's shrine to Diego Maradona, all those images of triumph and joy and innocent belief. Then Carlos Vega, the man who'd tried to disappear into ordinary life, began preparing for a reckoning that had been hunting him since the night he'd chosen to save a hero instead of destroying one. The truth was finally ready to come out, and it was going to devour everything in its path. Carlos drove through Buenos Aires, like a man traveling to his own execution, the city's familiar rhythms now alien and threatening. The warehouse district loomed ahead, a graveyard of rusted shipping containers and broken dreams where the Rio de la Plata whispered secrets to crumbling concrete. Dock 7 sat at the far end, isolated enough for conversations that required permanent silence. The warehouse door stood ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Carlos hesitated at the threshold, every instinct from his military days screaming warnings, but Isabella's face burned in his memory, her trust, her love, her innocent faith in both her father and her hero. He stepped inside. Emergency lighting cast skeletal shadows across the empty space. Footsteps echoed from the far end, where a figure emerged from behind a stack of moldering crates. Not Elena. Someone older, moving with the careful precision of expensive surgeries and careful rehabilitation. "Hello, Carlitos." The voice was different without electronic distortion. Weaker. But Carlos would have recognized it anywhere, because he'd listened to it celebrate Argentina's greatest triumph, while the man speaking died a little more each day from the weight of what that victory had cost. Diego Armando Maradona stepped into the light. Carlos's knees nearly buckled. The face was thinner, marked by plastic surgery and 3 years of supposed death, but the eyes remained unchanged, dark, intelligent, burning with the same mixture of genius and madness that had made him football's most dangerous player. "You're dead," Carlos whispered. "Yes, very thoroughly dead. Buried with full honors, mourned by millions, immortalized in bronze and marble." Diego's smile carried traces of the boy who had juggled oranges in Villa Fiorito slums. Death, it turns out, is the ultimate protection. Dead men can't testify. Dead men can't be subpoenaed. Dead men can't be held accountable for promises made in Mexican hotel rooms. The warehouse spun around Carlos as 37 years of carefully constructed reality crumbled. Every condolence he'd offered when the news broke. Every time he'd watched Isabella cry over her fallen idol. Every moment of guilt he'd carried for surviving while Argentina's greatest son succumbed to his demons. All of it. Performance, theater, a final game played by the master. The heart attack. Carefully induced. Medical allies, chemical assistance, a body that was already failing from decades of abuse. The hardest part was lying still while they pronounced me dead. Diego moved closer, his presence filling the empty warehouse with electric tension, but necessary. The investigation was closing in. Too many old associates talking, too many buried scandals surfacing. I needed to disappear before everything collapsed. Carlos backed away until cold concrete stopped his retreat. "Isabella mourned you. The entire country needed their myth intact. Better a tragic ending than the truth about how champions are really made." Diego's expression darkened. "You know that truth, Carlitos. You've carried it for 37 years like a stone in your chest. The weight of understanding that heroes and villains are often the same people, separated only by timing and perspective." The pieces realigned in Carlos's mind with horrible clarity. Elena's carefully orchestrated revelation, the surveillance footage that surfaced at exactly the right moment, the theatrical meeting at Café Tortoni, designed to measure his reactions and confirm his vulnerabilities. "You've been watching me. All these years. Protecting you. There's a difference." Diego circled him like a predator evaluating prey. "Do you think the Camorra forgot about their failed operation? Do you think the German intelligence services stopped caring about their compromised footage? You've been alive for 37 years because I made you disappear into ordinary life. Carlos Vega, security consultant. Devoted father. Harmless. What changed? I got old, sick, careless." Diego's laugh held no humor. Someone found the hotel recordings, not the German someone else, someone who understood what they meant. They've been shopping the story to the highest bidders, and some very dangerous people are suddenly very interested in finding the man who knows where all the bodies are buried. Carlos felt the trap closing around him with mathematical precision. "So you faked your death and hired Elena to flush me out before they could find me." "Elena works for people who ultimately work for me." "Yes." Diego stopped circling, his gaze piercing. "But there's something you need to understand, old friend. Something that makes this conversation complicated." The silence stretched between them like a blade. "Those recordings from the hotel room? The ones where you refused to break my legs, where we planned your disappearance? They're not the only tapes that exist. There are others. Conversations from earlier that night before you arrived. Conversations where I explain exactly how to manipulate a young soldier's conscience, exactly what words would make him choose loyalty over payment." Carlos's world inverted completely. The noble choice he'd carried like a badge of honor for 37 years, revealed as orchestration, manipulation. Diego had known exactly which emotional strings to pull, exactly how to transform a hired thug into a willing protector. "You played me." "I saved you," Diego corrected, but his arrogance was showing now, the pride that had always been his weakness. "I turned a man who would have spent his life as a criminal into someone worth being." By lying to me about everything. By giving you a chance to become the hero in your own story instead of the villain in mine. But Carlos heard the fundamental miscalculation in those words. Diego's inability to understand that stolen choices, however well-intentioned, remained theft. The great man's final game had been too clever by half, and now the truth was consuming everything in its path, just as he'd always known it would. Carlos stared at the man who had shaped his entire adult life through elaborate deception, feeling something dangerous kindle in his chest. Not the familiar weight of guilt he'd carried for decades, but something sharper, cleaner. The fury of a man discovering his sacrifice had been choreographed from the beginning. 37 years, he said quietly. 37 years of believing I made a choice that mattered. It did matter. Just not in the way you thought. Diego moved to an overturned crate and sat heavily, the gesture revealing how much the years of hiding had cost him. The Camorra would have destroyed you, Carlitos. Used you until you were worthless, then discarded you like garbage. I gave you a life, a daughter, a purpose. You gave me a lie. I gave you a legend, the man who saved Maradona, the soldier who chose honor over money. Diego's voice carried the same hypnotic quality that had once convinced an entire nation to believe in miracles. What's the difference between truth and legend when both lead to the same place? Carlos thought of Isabella's face that morning, bright with innocence and trust. Her message still burned in his pocket. Love you, Papa. Words that would become knives when she learned how thoroughly her father had been manipulated, how completely their life together had been built on someone else's orchestration. The difference, Carlos said, is that legends don't have to live with the consequences. He studied Diego's changed face, searching for traces of the man who had wept genuine tears in that Mexico City hotel room. Or had those tears been performance too? Another calculated element in a game so complex that even the players didn't understand their roles? Those other recordings, Carlos continued. The ones where you planned my manipulation. Who else has heard them? No one. Yet. Diego's smile returned, but it looked forced now, desperate. That's why we're here. I need you to help me retrieve them before they surface. One final job for old time's sake. Where are they? Elena has them. She doesn't know what they contain, thinks they're just insurance against the people who hired her. But she's meeting her real employer tonight. Someone who's been very patient, very careful, and very interested in destroying both our reputations. Carlos felt the walls closing in around him, but not in the familiar way of being trapped. This felt different, like being positioned exactly where he needed to be. Who? Francesco Toretti, son of the Camorra capo who hired you in 1986. He was 22 then, just starting to understand how his father's business worked. He's 59 now, and he's spent decades building a legitimate empire in Argentina. Construction, real estate, political connections. Diego stood slowly, age showing in his movements. But legitimacy is fragile. If it comes out that his family tried to fix the '86 final, that they were connected to match fixing at the highest levels, he loses everything. Worse, he becomes expendable to the very people who've been protecting him. The modern Camorra doesn't tolerate embarrassment. Carlos understood now, not just the game but the stakes. Toretti couldn't simply expose the truth. He needed to control it completely. That meant eliminating everyone who could contradict his version of events, starting with the two men who knew exactly what had happened in that hotel room. Elena's meeting him tonight? Puerto Madero, his penthouse overlooking the water, very private, very secure, the kind of place where inconvenient truths get permanently buried. Diego's voice dropped to a whisper. Along with the people who carry them. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of water against concrete. Carlos watched Diego's face in the harsh emergency lighting, seeing for the first time not a football god or master manipulator, but an aging man who had miscalculated badly. The great Maradona, who had built a career on perfect timing, had finally moved too late. You need me to go after her, Carlos said. Retrieve the recordings before Toretti can use them. I need you to save your own life, and your daughter's. The facade cracked completely now, revealing the fear underneath. Toretti won't stop with us, Carlitos. Isabella knows about your military background, your work in private security. She could piece things together if she wanted to. That makes her dangerous. That makes her a target. The words hit Carlos like a physical blow. He had spent decades trying to protect Isabella from the truth about his past, only to discover that the past was already reaching for her with patient, murderous fingers. What are you proposing? Diego reached into his jacket and withdrew a familiar weight, a Beretta 92F's, standard Argentine military issue. He set it on the crate between them like a chess piece being moved into position. One last game, Diego said quietly. Winner takes all. Loser disappears forever. But Carlos was already calculating angles, distances, exits. The student finally ready to surpass his teacher. Carlos stared at the weapon between them, its metallic surface reflecting the harsh warehouse lighting like a judgment waiting to be passed. 37 years of deception crystallized into this moment, two aging men facing the ruins of their elaborate lies. You still don't understand, Carlos said quietly, not reaching for the gun. This was never your game to control. Diego's confidence wavered. What do you mean? Isabella. The name hung in the air like a prayer. My daughter, who worships you, who cried for 3 days when you died, who built a shrine in our apartment to honor your memory. Carlos stepped closer and Diego instinctively backed away. She's studying journalism now. Did you know that? Specializing in investigative work. Very talented, very thorough. The blood drained from Diego's face as understanding began to dawn. Elena Vasquez doesn't exist, Carlos continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. The byline, the articles, the carefully constructed career, all fabricated. Because my daughter needed a cover identity to get close to the truth. She's been investigating you for 18 months, ever since she started questioning inconsistencies in the official story of your death. Diego stumbled backward, his legendary composure finally cracking completely. That's impossible. Isabella is 23 years old, brilliant, and absolutely relentless when she believes in something. Carlos's smile held no warmth. She inherited that last part from me. The real me, not the manipulated version you created. She can't possibly know everything. The hotel recordings, the Camorra connection, Toretti's involvement, even your fake death. Carlos moved with the predatory grace of his military training, backing Diego against the warehouse wall. You see, Diego, you made one fatal error. You assumed Isabella was just an innocent variable in your equation. You never considered that she might be the one solving it. Diego's hand twitched toward the gun, but Carlos was faster, sweeping the weapon aside with casual efficiency. It clattered across the concrete floor, spinning into darkness. She's been feeding you information through Elena, Carlos continued relentlessly. Measuring your responses, documenting your desperation, building a case that will destroy not just your legend, but the entire network that's protected you for decades. Why? Diego's voice broke on the word. She loved me. Argentina loved me. Argentina loved a myth. Isabella loved an ideal. Carlos stopped just short of striking distance, his presence filling the space between them with electric tension. But she loves her father more than both, and she refuses to let him carry guilt for choices that weren't really choices at all. The warehouse fell silent except for their breathing and the distant sound of water against concrete. Diego slumped against the wall, looking suddenly fragile and ancient. The journalist from this morning, Diego whispered. That was really her? My brilliant daughter, making sure you would run to exactly where she needed you to be. Carlos felt something like pride warm his chest. She's been watching this warehouse for hours, documenting our conversation, recording your confession, every word you've spoken tonight. She'll destroy herself along with me. The truth will implicate you. Implicate her. No. Carlos's voice carried absolute certainty. Because there's something you still don't understand about honor, Diego. Real honor isn't about protecting lies, even beautiful ones. It's about accepting consequences for your choices, even when those choices were manipulated. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized years ago but never used. When the call connected, Carlos spoke clearly into the warehouse's echoing silence. Federal Police? This is Carlos Vega. I need to report a conspiracy involving match-fixing, organized crime, and fraud involving the 1986 World Cup. Yes, I'll hold. Diego lunged forward desperately, but Carlos caught him easily, muscle memory from decades of training overwhelming the older man's desperation. They struggled briefly before Diego collapsed, his surgically repaired body unable to sustain the effort. "You're destroying everything," Diego gasped. Argentina's greatest triumph was real," Carlos said firmly. "Your talent was real. The goals, the victories, the joy you brought to millions, none of that was fabricated. But the mythology around it, the lies that protected it, those end tonight." Footsteps echoed from the warehouse entrance as Isabella emerged from the shadows, camera in hand, tears streaming down her face. Behind her came men in federal police uniforms, their presence filling the empty space with authority and consequence. "Hello, Papa," Isabella said softly, her voice breaking on the words. Carlos opened his arms and his daughter ran to him, sobbing against his chest as the weight of 37 years finally lifted from his shoulders. Around them, Diego Armando Maradona was being read his rights in a language he'd spent decades trying to transcend. The truth had finally come out, and it was beautiful. 3 months later, Carlos sat in the same cafe where it had all begun, watching Buenos Aires wake up through rain-streaked windows. The morning papers lay scattered across his table, their headlines no longer shocking. "Maradona fraud trial begins. Camorra connections exposed. The man who saved the '86 final." The coffee tasted the same. Everything else had changed. Isabella approached through the morning crowd, her press credentials swaying from a lanyard around her neck. She moved with the confident stride of a journalist whose investigation had rewritten sports history, but her eyes still held the warmth of the daughter who had once built shrines to fallen heroes. "How are you feeling, Papa?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "Old?" Carlos admitted, managing a smile, "but lighter somehow." The trial had been a media sensation. Diego's testimony, delivered from a secure federal facility, had unraveled decades of carefully constructed mythology. The real story proved more complex than anyone had imagined, not just match-fixing, but money laundering, political corruption, and a web of organized crime that reached into the highest levels of international football. Carlos had testified for 6 hours, his military bearing unchanged despite the weight of revelation. He told them about the hotel room, the choice he thought he'd made, the 37 years of carrying guilt for a decision that had been orchestrated from the beginning. The prosecutors called him a hero, the defense called him a dupe, the media called him the man who saved football's integrity. He called himself a father trying to protect his daughter from inheriting his lies. "Francesco Toretti was sentenced yesterday," Isabella said quietly, setting down her own coffee. 25 years. His entire empire collapsed once the Camorra connections came out. Carlos nodded. Justice, when it finally arrived, had been swift and merciless. The legitimate businesses built on illegitimate foundations crumbled like sandcastles in the tide. Toretti's associates had scattered to the winds, but many were already in custody. The truth, once released, had proven unstoppable. And Diego? House arrest. Medical supervision. The lawyers think he'll serve maybe 5 years, considering his age and cooperation. Isabella's voice carried no satisfaction. "He keeps asking to see you." "No. I thought you'd say that." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "You know, people keep asking me how I knew, how I figured out he was alive, how I tracked you both." Carlos waited. His daughter had always needed to work through complex thoughts aloud. "The truth is, I never suspected Diego at all. I was investigating you." Her smile was gentle but piercing. "My father, the war hero who never talked about his service, who jumped at unexpected sounds and kept military-grade locks on our apartment, who had enough money for my education but claimed he'd earned it providing security for small businesses." The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to protect Isabella from his past, he had made himself suspicious enough that her journalistic instincts couldn't ignore the inconsistencies. "When I started digging into your military record, I found the gaps, classified missions, references to special assignments during the World Cup period. It took months to connect those dots to the persistent rumors about Maradona and organized crime." Isabella's grip on his hand tightened. "I thought you were the villain, Papa. I spent weeks believing my father had been paid to hurt Argentina's greatest hero. What changed your mind?" "Finding the real recordings. The ones Diego thought he'd destroyed, where you can hear him planning exactly what to say to make you refuse the job. Isabella's voice dropped to a whisper, hearing him laugh about how easy it would be to manipulate a simple soldier into becoming his unwitting protector. Carlos felt the familiar stab of betrayal, though it had dulled with repetition. The great Maradona's final game had been his most elaborate and his most catastrophic failure. "Do you regret it?" Isabella asked. "Learning the truth?" Carlos considered the question while watching the city pulse with morning energy. Somewhere out there, children still kicked footballs against wall murals of Diego Maradona, not the man, but the myth that transcended the man. The joy he had brought to millions remained real, even if the mythology surrounding it had crumbled. "No," he said finally, "truth has weight, but it's clean weight." The lies were heavier. Isabella smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the little girl who had once asked him to explain why heroes sometimes did bad things. "I have to go," she said, standing. "The editor wants my follow-up piece by noon. What's the angle this time?" "Redemption," she said simply. The man who carried a secret for 37 years to protect his country's joy, even when that secret was destroying him. After she left, Carlos remained at the cafe until the afternoon rain began. He thought about choices and consequences, about the difference between truth and legend, about the strange mathematics of love and sacrifice. Somewhere in the city, Diego Maradona was learning that even gods must face judgment. But Carlos Vega was finally free to be simply a father whose daughters saw him clearly and loved him anyway. That, he decided, was victory enough.